manage people. And I found the best way to manage people is to get people to manage themselves. What's exciting to me is to finally come here and realize that these self-management systems were born in Arabia. They call them ketara in Morocco. They call it aflaj or falaj across Oman and the Arabian Peninsula. And this is what I'm trying to build on, because we have new technology, we have new capacity, we have new science, but the same systems that have worked throughout this region for nearly 1,000 years can work through a new system that I'd like to talk to you about. The challenge, we all know, is very common. There is too many straws and only one milkshake. And so you start to see, as he describes, the water levels going down, and people, instead of saying, oh dear, we should save some for later, they start pumping faster. They start taking more water, and they start bringing it to the surface as fast as possible. Now, why do they do this? How many of you here have heard of the tragedy of the commons? This system where if you don't own something, and you only rent temporary access, you want to get as much of it as possible. And even out of self-interest, even though you know you are destroying this resource, you can't help it, because if you don't pump that water, someone else will. Your neighbor will. He will use your water. And this is, what's led us in California, and I think throughout the region, into this system. The middle image there is how far the land subsidence has come just in 40 or 50 years. And it's one of the driving forces behind water scarcity. It's invisible, as we saw, and so we don't think of it in the same way as a dry river. But no one knows this issue better than the region. The challenge for officials is, how do you govern this? That water scarcity comes from two things: not enough supply or too much demand. And usually we say, oh, well, there's too much demand, we need to punish people that try to do too much. And that's extremely difficult when you have these decentralized systems. It creates these systems of the government versus the well owner, the farmer. Raises questions of how much will it cost to become sustainable. The privacy issues. If people have been pumping water, they don't want others to know how much water they've been using. And if you say, okay, we need to govern this, people's first question is like, how much do I get? What's my share? If you're going to cap this, how much of it do I get? Again, the solutions have been here for thousands of years, but they've been in traditional societies, small local societies. The aflaj or ketara are where people, there wasn't a central authority, there was no single minister of water or even local official. People negotiated their access to that water, often groundwater, with each other. And they would invest, determining how much water they needed. And if they didn't need that water for a certain season or a certain crop, they would negotiate with other people there. And it included the mosques, it included the schools, it included the village, it included the farmers. And it worked. The question again is, how do we transform these timeless systems that have proven themselves to our own society? And what we've tried to develop is the equivalent of an Airbnb for the water that people save in a groundwater setting. And that led to this online platform. It's not a quick process, but it's one that builds trust. It moves us closer from competing with each other to drink up and pump up the last drop of an aquifer to working with each other. And it's open. We decide what's our goal here, how much do we want to have the level at, do we want to do managed aquifer recharge, do we want to put more water in, or do we want to limit what we take out, and making those decisions as a group. We don't decide. We often come in and say, we want to help you set up a conservation market for your groundwater. And they say, okay, well, what are the rules? And this scares people, but we tell them, we don't make the rules. You do. And they say, well, you don't tell us what to do? It's like, no, you tell yourselves what to do, how you want to manage this groundwater. And then they say, as I said, what's my share? How much do I get? That is also part of the process of designing it. Making sure that this is done in a transparent manner with a neutral broker is important so that no one feels there's some side deals going on, there's some corruption, there's some arrangements made, that the fix is in. And also by enabling trading, of transferring, it allows flexibility for people to say, oh, if I use less, then somebody else, I can trade what I save to them. We developed a book on this, a design guidebook, it is not a prescription, it is not a recipe book, it takes people through the steps. And I want to just show you a little bit of the sense, because it's new for people. And it requires several meetings, sometimes a dozen meetings of the whole group to define the rules of a sample. And moving closer from collaboration and learning new skills and saying, okay, what does the mapping show? What do the hydrologists tell us? What is in the basin? What do we have to work with? Until the group has confidence that they can do this, and they can do this together. It's an equitable allocation system is essential, that people have to have a sense that this is fair, and that it's inclusive, that no one's been left out. And so we've actually worked with people that are renting their homes but want to make sure that some of that water is for them. That it involves individuals as well as businesses, as well as irrigation societies. And that there is something set aside for people who are moving into the basin so that they don't feel left out, so that they don't feel like, oh, well, we can't live here, we can't work here, we can't farm here because somebody else has already decided it. So it's a way of seeing this as a pie and then dividing it up into different portions, different allocations for different users. And again, we don't do this. The group decides what the terms are. Is it for individuals? Who gets to participate? Do we all get the same amount at the beginning? Or do we base these allocations on our historic uses? So that if I've been irrigating 500 acres and my neighbor has been irrigating 50 acres, I would get 10 times as much, as large an allocation as him. And that would seem like, oh boy, that's not fair. But why it works is that both me and my neighbor start to see that, boy, if we work together and bring the aquifer back, this small amount that we can use will be bigger. It will require less energy so that we don't have to pump the water from 400 meters below the surface. We only need to pump it from 4 or 40 meters below the surface. And so we actually save money. We earn more from using less. These are the sort of the elements of a healthy groundwater market structure. That it's durable, that it will last, that it will be tested through drought and rainy seasons, and that people have some confidence that what they hold back on now will pay them back 3, 4, 5 years from now. That the shares are defined, that they know with confidence that I will be able to pump this many cubic meters of water a day or a year, and that there's rules, that if I obey the rules, that my share will be defendable, and that I can pass on my share to my children, my sons and daughters, or I can sell or lease some of my share to my neighbors. Now this is an important slide I want to dwell on a little bit, because one of the questions we had in California, and I think a lot of you may be facing as well, is, we don't even know who's using how much water, and we would have to put meters on all these wells, and if I approach one of the farmers to put a meter on their well, they're going to come after me with a big stick and chase me away. And that's the same issue from California through around. What's exciting to me is that we've now been able to work with technology and remote sensing so that the satellites can actually give a historic picture of who's been using how much water over the last 10, 20 years per a small half acre, the size of this extended room. And they're able to do that by comparing the albedo effects of different plants given a certain climate. So this scares farmers at first, but then when they know everybody has the same exposure, it gives them confidence that they're all playing by the same rules. As you heard in the introduction, I've worked also in fisheries. And you think, wait a minute, we're talking about freshwater here, not saltwater. But the same issue has been applied in fishing, where all the fishermen tried to catch as much fish as possible until they had a fishery market based on their past harvests, and it's worked. It's shown how they start to catch less, they're more precise in how they catch, and it brings about an extraordinary recovery when people voluntarily start being selective on how much they harvest of this invisible resource. It has value left where it is. Now, the questions we face are some that I think you guys would face as well. People say, what are the rules? How do you determine what the cost of this groundwater is? And how long do my shares last? And the first thing we always say is we don't decide that. AquaShares is a broker for you to make those decisions. Large irrigators want to make sure that they have a share and that people don't just take away from them. Environmentalists, local, national, international, want to make sure that there is a voice in place for the groundwater-dependent ecosystems, the gaining streams that were once lost, the wetlands, the roots of the trees, the olives are going to be nourished. And the social justice element. Is there a human right to water? Sustainable development goals. How do you incorporate that into the groundwater market? Or is this just where the rich guys run off with all the water? That you can put in place systems and buffers to make sure that everyone is represented and has a secure ability. Most of the concern comes from the small farmers that are saying, I'm just using enough to produce for my family, for my home. I only use 2 acre feet. How am I represented here? Getting those guys to the table on the front end makes sure it's hard at first, but then it makes sure that the system will last and the trust is there. It's not just us that are, have said this is the case. The Nobel laureate Elinor Ostrom has found this works around the world, not just in fisheries, not just in groundwater, but in all systems. That self-managed, self-organizing systems, it's hard, it's time-consuming, but it works. That you test it out in a local level with 10, 15 different groundwater users, that builds confidence to expand it to a larger area. Setting the initial share allocations is initially very, very testy. Wait, I want more, and he shouldn't have this much. But there's new ways of making this transparent and building trust. So this is basically what we offer, is that experience, the technology to be able to take what's worked for 1,000 years in Aflage and Qattara and scaling it up online, and showing that the price of trading that groundwater is always going to be less than the cost of new supplies. I think it was a wonderful analogy that we think, oh, nothing of filling a tanker full of water and shipping it from one place to another, and that the aquifer itself has that value protection from evaporation. We need to value that, but finding ways to use less is always going to cost less than finding new water to supply. So it all boils down to this, if you can save water, if you can find ways to put in drip irrigation to change your crop, you can sell your credits for profit. And if you say, look, I just put in almond trees, I need to protect that investment, you can buy credits from your neighbors. So that flexibility helps build the trust. In terms of the sustainable development goals, this brings these different elements that are so competing into a convergence of collaboration, easing the tensions that continue to grow in these arid regions. So I'll leave it there, but I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, James. I think it is also always looking for innovative approaches to manage the scarce resources, and the issue of creating markets that are self-regulated markets. I think this has been one of the approaches to start looking especially at the common pool when resources are viewed as a common pool. Before I ask my own question, I think it's the audience who definitely deserve the time to ask questions. We officially have about 15 minutes for question. We can expand it if all agree to, beyond that if we have many questions. Can we please have a microphone available, please? Thank you. Any questions to, okay, we'll start there, and then gentlemen, and then Mr. Hadi.
Hadi from Kahrama from the Qatar. First of all, thank you for your informative presentation. My question to Morocco, what was the native water when you, what was the treated water, the quality, and what was the native water? And the second question, I mean, do you have any routine preventive maintenance or operational to start the pub periodically in order to prepare for the emergency plan? My other question to expert, please. Do you think that water meter, it might be, I mean, it is a good opportunity to monitor the consumption of the Kassan, especially if there is, you know, I mean, being concerned regarding with stress water? Thanks.
So thank you for your question. As I explained before, the quality of water we recharge is drinking water. It's exactly water we send for the city. Apart from this water, we recharge it. But before this, we did the model that it's protected because the substratum is clay and marl, so there is no loss to the sea and there is no salt water intrusion. So we have this risk. Second, we are the alone who manage this aquifer. There is no agriculture because it's small aquifer, and we are the alone manager. The water abstracted, we add, of course, we make disinfection, but it's okay. There's no problem. We in sometime in the zone where there is some fault, we have this problem of suspension material, but by experience now we design good well with the Johnson screen, with the pack gravel, and we get water, clean water. What we add also it's chloration of the water.
And then Dr.
Yeah.
Here.
You had a second question on
Yes, there was a second question concerning the water meter.
Yes.
I didn't get your question very clearly. Is it a water meter? Is it an appropriate instrument?
Yes, for the wells, for the ground.
For the wells. I mean, the most appropriate instrument that can be used, to me, is the cheapest one that generates trust to the other stakeholders. So if it is a water meter or is it a different technology, I mean, that is but to me, the idea of the water meter is